Really excited to be sharing some of my research here today, and also really glad to be presenting, not co-presenting, presenting on this in the same session as Maria, because we have a lot of overlapping shared interests on the promises and limitations of farmed animal sanctuaries. So I'm really stoked to see her presentation later on as well. So yeah, I'm here today to talk a bit about farmed animal sanctuaries in relation to the concept of reanimalization and try to kind of draw some connections to the theme of the conference around capitalism. So first, I'll just kind of briefly go over the context of my research. Then I'll introduce and define the concept of reanimalization, and then talk a little bit about how farmed animal sanctuaries offer this alternative anti-capitalist temporality in a really kind of radical way. So for my research, I was primarily interested in these main research questions. So I was looking at what types of alignments and tensions that may or may not exist between animal and other social and environmental justice movements, and how the farmed animal sanctuary might reveal this as sort of a site where some of these tensions alignments come together. And how does the institutionalization of norms that privilege other animals at the sanctuary shift the power dynamics and subsequent negotiations between humans and other animals? And also, in what ways does the sanctuary as an entity embody the promises and challenges of multi-species justice through the collective practices and relations of the sanctuary's human and more than human members?
Sounds
Yeah, so
interesting.
so my ethnographic research involved kind of spending a month at a sanctuary in Australia, where I just worked as a volunteer while learning about the lives of both the humans and the animals there through participant observation and also interviews with the founders. Yeah, so for my research, I take Kritika Srinivasan's concept of reanimalization to be one of the primary considerations when it comes to the work of farmed animal sanctuaries. So Srinivasan presents reanimalization as a response and alternative to the protection sacrifice logics functioning in the context of development. Protection sacrifice logics produce an understanding of human well-being rooted in forms of zoopolitical exceptionalisms, where human lives and health are always prioritized, even if it produces injustices through large scales of harm and violence against more than humans. Some examples of such harms include the exploitation of other animals and organisms in biomedical research aimed at prolonging human lives and protecting humans against diseases, industrial agriculture's use of petrochemicals, and large-scale resource extraction projects causing devastations in multi-species ecological communities. Furthermore, Srinivasan points out that such problems are rooted in human exceptionalism and are not restricted to capitalist regimes or capitalist logics of economic growth, a commodification, and extractivism, because conventional strategies in development organized around natural resource extraction pervade even community-oriented left-leaning governments and civil society groups. So in response to the crises of human exceptionalism, reanimalization aims at redistributing the risks of earthly living amongst humans, particularly humans who are more socioeconomically privileged and insulated against these risks, and thereby moving us beyond our more than animal norms and placing us as one amongst other animal species. In this manner, reanimalization demands a radical form of vulnerability that breaks down the nature-society and human-animal divide. The prefix re in reanimalization indicates the fact that humans have always been biologically animals, and it was through the pursuit of material interests and reinforced by ideological indoctrination that humans have come to separate ourselves from the rest of nature. However, Srinivasan acknowledges that reanimalization encounters issues in relation to dehumanization in a world where not all humans enjoy equal ethical political status due to historical and ongoing oppressions, which sees that many humans continue to be categorized and treated as subhuman, and where animal is coded with negative meanings. So in response to this problem, she has several proposals. So one of the things she suggests we could do is we could, critique dehumanizing or animalizing practices, such as torture and captivity in and of themselves, regardless of the species subjected to such violence, without relying on referencing being animals or being or animalized as negative. She also notes that reanimalization needs to be carried out with attention to social justice by taking into account the existing inequities. And we could also challenge zoopolitical exceptionalism with radically alternative ontologies, such as ecofeminism, indigenous, and decolonial worldviews. And lastly, she suggests that alternative narratives highlighting the interconnectedness and interdependence of human and more than human well-being might be very important as well. And this is the part that I kind of focus on. I think farmed animal sanctuaries do a particularly good job at kind of highlighting this kind of interconnectedness. So writer and fine art photographer Isa Leshko's monograph "Allowed to Grow Old: Portraits of Elderly Animals from Farm Sanctuaries" is a collection of portraits featuring elderly farmed animals taken by Leshko at numerous sanctuaries across the United States. The gripping photos of Leshko's senior animal subjects present a confronting reminder that had many of them not been rescued and given the opportunity to live to an old age, they would have been slaughtered prior to their first birthday. As Leshko notes, animals farmed for human consumption are bred to reach slaughter weight at a younger age than ever before. In the early 20th century, chickens raised and used for meat, commonly referred to as broilers, lived approximately 112 days and weighed 2.5 pounds at the time of their slaughter. But in 2017, they were slaughtered at only 47 days old, at which point they weigh 6.18 pounds. Observing this same phenomenon where over the past 50 years, broiler chickens have been genetically selected to effectively halve their growing time. Dinesh Waterwell argues that this is the result of an efficiency and value maximizing capitalist food production system that demands the labor time required for food animals to produce themselves as commodities to be minimized in order for the industries to extract maximum surplus. The elderly farmed animals featured in Leshko's portraits give materiality to the potency within the title of her project itself, that there is something inherently radical and transformative about simply allowing farmed animals to grow old in a world where human sovereignty has mandated not only that they're not supposed to reach elderly age, but actively shortens their lives to minimize costs and maximize profit. The alternate temporality that farmed animal sanctuaries afford rescued animals demonstrates a politicized transition towards an alternative mode of existence beyond capitalism. Waterwell remarks that the entire life of a food animal is equivalent to the production cycle itself and prompts us to think how farmed animals might experience not just capital's time, but time outside the productive rhythms of capitalism, in which every moment of life became a value-producing moment for capital. Through the concept of resistant time, Waterwell questions what would it mean to give animals time, that is, recognize their resistance to capitalist time, and how might this resonate with other political projects that similarly aim to intervene in the politics of time? And I think farmed animal sanctuaries give us glimpses of what resistant time for formerly farmed animals might look like. In my effort to learn about the animal residents at the sanctuary where I did my field work, I asked the founders to share any memorable personality shifts over time that they have seen amongst individual animals that they have rescued. And I won't go through all the kind of individual stories and examples, and I think many of us will actually be familiar with these kinds of transformations, but essentially the kind of stories they shared seems to be about the animals really spending time according to their own preferences. So really, it's kind of examples where time is fully within their own control for the animal residents. And as examples of resistant time, there's also plenty of stories about successful rehabilitation and healing from physical and emotional trauma, as well as overcoming relational and emotional traumas to bond with others. So, and kind of build trust with both the humans and other animal residents, which demonstrate kind of another facet of resistant time, which is about generating and repairing relationships. So just to conclude, I think when we think about what anti-capitalist lessons we can learn from farmed animal sanctuaries and their rescued residents, I think they show us what an alternative temporality outside capitalist time, that is resistant time, what that might look like. And also the importance of healing, repair, survival, and transformation as parts of the alternative narratives that highlight the interconnectedness and interdependence of human and more than human well-being in the process of reanimalization. So when we think about what does reanimalization mean for humans, I think we can draw on some of these insights and lessons from farmed animals. Thanks. Yeah, I'll end there.
So hi, everyone. I'm Maria, obviously, and I'm also happy to be presenting in the panel with Darren. And I'm really, I wish we had more time to talk together, but maybe we will in the break, because I also have like questions and stuff to discuss. And I've been thinking about animal sanctuaries on and off for about 4 years, and I'm doing this research independently. And this particular presentation is mostly growing out of this video essay that you can see here, Escape, Resistance, and Solidarity, Farmed Animal Sanctuaries at the Heart of the Movement, which we created with the Just Wandering collective that I am part of, along with my friends and colleagues, Mina Mimosa and Aaron Nor. So basically in this video essay, as you can tell from the title, we look at how animals escape, at how animals resist, and at how farmed animal sanctuaries can be forms of solidarity towards their actions. And like all of my research starts from this very big question and trying to figure out, okay, what would animal liberation look like? And then how can we possibly reach it? So this is why I started looking at animal sanctuaries, because we have there a glimpse of how it could possibly look like, I think. So I will talk a little bit like about the present, some challenges of animal sanctuaries, a particular case study of some struggles, and just swoosh towards possible dreams of the future. So in my initial research sites, I started with 2 vegan sanctuaries in Romania and then switched on towards a third one. But what I really mean to say here is just like summarize a bit about what I find that sanctuaries can do really well. And that is, for example, to respond to the voices of non-human animals, to really try to hear them when, for example, understanding that they cry for help and they need a safe space to be in, and then rescue them, right? So then the second thing they do once the animals are there is really centering their needs and really trying to provide a safe space for them to engage in species-specific behavior and socialize, and then ideally even try to give them even more freedom sometimes to have some choices, ideally. And then third, what they do, obviously, they refuse the commodity status of non-human animals. And third, and the last thing that I am also trying to looking more towards is the work of care, and how this work of care towards non-human animals is against disposability and all the complexities that this care enacts, right? Because it is done from an unbalanced position of power. So, for example, Timothy Packard says that sanctuaries might be better understood as spaces for ongoing and necessarily imperfect practices of entangled empathy, spaces for the development of always provisional enactments of interspecies possibility written in the messy language of mutual care, affect, and embodiment. And also this is also how I look at, I think many sanctuary people, how they look at themselves, that this is all just really a process of learning and trying to learn certain things. But there are so many difficulties about how do we learn to be in these multi-species places. So I am trying to just point to some of the challenges that I noticed. And I sort of categorize them, but it's not really clear cut because all of them affect sort of everyone, but in different ways. So for the non-human animals, I think what's really, it can be challenging that they actually many times have to abide by the rules of the space. And in many instances of sanctuaries, they cannot shape these rules very much. Sometimes they can a little bit in some sanctuaries, but I don't think it is that often. And then the other thing is that it's very difficult to find ways to give consent for certain procedures, especially veterinary procedures, which are made upon the non-human animals without them really wishing them to. So, for example, one of the procedures that many animal sanctuaries do is the neutering, right? Because they do not want to have a growth of population within the sanctuary. And then another thing is that it can become really difficult for some sanctuaries to figure out how to allocate resources, because there are just so many non-human animals that live in absolutely terrible conditions that overcrowding might become a problem if people take too many non-human animals inside the sanctuary. And then for the sanctuary caregivers, I think there are these really big three things, and for many sanctuaries, a big problem is the financial part, because economically it is very costly to care for so many non-human animals, and especially if it's a farmed animal sanctuary that takes in big farm animals, like for example cows and horses, then you need to have a lot of space, and that's not easy to find. And then there's the huge workload that I think anybody whoever volunteered at the sanctuary can attest to, that there's just this a lot of things to be done, very physical work, but also emotional work. So it's just care and a lot of care work. So it's a constant, ongoing energy that you need to put there, and you actually need many people to be able to do it properly. And in my experience in sanctuaries, it just so happens that there are not enough of the people that would be needed. And then this leads to psychological and emotional stress. And then broadly, I think the issue is that these farmed animal sanctuaries respond to a context that is hostile to them, right? And many people speak about this. Also Darren, in his paper with Stephanie Eccles, the fact that they are entangled with the animal agriculture, right? But then there's also, they have laws. So the animal sanctuary in most of the places, I don't think they have like a special law category, right? They don't exist as spaces of care for farmed animals. They just exist as they're within the normal categorization of exploiting farmed animals, right? So just this huge context makes it really difficult to deal with the imbalance of power that the humans have. And it's challenging to try to turn rescuing animals and the position that we as humans have into forms of solidarity. And how do we not only learn to see it as a more equal relationship, but actually practice it in that way. And to really look at how challenging this capitalist anthropocentric context is, I was really struck by the events in Italy in 2023 with the Fuori Liberi sanctuary that I will just go through really quickly right now. So basically in Italy in 2023, like I said before, most animal sanctuaries do not exist in the law, or not enshrined in the law. But in 2023 in Italy, after 10 years of campaigning, activists managed to pass a decree to recognize animal sanctuaries as refuges. So basically as places in which animals can exist not for human consumption. And this was like a big win in certain ways. And I think many people from farmed animal sanctuaries were at least a little bit joyful about it, even if they were still critical and even if they still kept the distance. And also, then why was this so important? It was important, of course, for many reasons. But one of the reasons was that there's this ongoing, in the last years, this ongoing African swine fever epidemic that sometimes it's global, so it's a pandemic almost. And then in September, what happened is that there was a really big outbreak in North Italy. And the swine fever virus, which is a virus that only affects pigs, it does not affect humans or other animals, entered inside one sanctuary, the Fuori Liberi sanctuary. And as a measure to contain the outbreak, the public measure was given that all of the pigs in the region had to be killed, including the one in the sanctuaries. So people started protesting. Of course, they were terribly angry. They were many people started gathering in the village, and there was this quite big protest and resistance, which we also go through in the animated essay. And I think they are also making a documentary about this specific case. But even so, it did not work out. So they held the gates for some days, but then the police entered and the pigs were killed. And huge protests. There were even bigger protests than after in the cities in Rome and Milan. But what I think we need to gather from this, and what was a shock to them, and they had to gather as well, was that not even sanctuaries were safe enough, right? So this is a quote from an anonymous activist, Papi Riot, who said that this was a shock rooted in liberal delusions, a slap in the face of our beliefs about basic rights in a democracy. Because not only had that law passed just recently, but also they made this argument that, right, the pigs were enclosed in this private space, in the private space of somebody, right? So the police barged in, even like undoing certain rules of liberal democracy to salvage capital. Because what is really important about why they have to pull all of the pigs to contain the virus, so they can start producing again, so they can start breeding pigs again, and the industry can start working again. So this is what Papi Riot said. This is an element of this political trauma, that there are no safe spaces. This is what we had always thought about refugee sanctuaries, that they are safe spaces. What will be the next space that turns out to be viable? How will we respond? And I think these are really, really important questions that we need to grapple as people that are interested in researching and in doing animal liberation work, right? Because we see these hopes in certain spaces, and then we need to understand that they are also fragile, and how they can be made stronger, right? So after we published the video essay, we also made a zine with the essay and all the bibliography, which is most of the bibliography of my talk here that you can find on the website. And in the zine, we also had some afterthoughts. And then, you know, if I would make it again, then I probably would have even longer afterthoughts, because this always happens. So first, like I already said, the safety of non-human animals as property is always fragile under the power of an anthropocentric state. Second, the lives of non-human animals who escaped or were saved from factory farming remain entangled with the animal industrial complex as long as it exists. And third, liberal law won't be enough to protect any of us, because the police will always enforce the interests of the capital. I think just going back to what I started with, which is the potential of sanctuaries, and going back to what people from animal sanctuaries say, this is a quote from an animal sanctuary in Italy, and they said that sanctuaries hold a quiet rage. The fact that they are not only these peaceful places or places of coexistence that is without tumult, but rather that they have this roar within them, because they have to deal with the aftermath of the factories inflicted trauma. And so they are always very conscious of this hostile context in many ways. And I think we can cling to this consciousness to try to make more links, also like Darren said, with other social movements. And another thing that I find important is looking at the future and how people from sanctuaries envision the future. And many people from Sanctuaries and many researchers noted that actually Sanctuaries wish for their own disappearance, right? They wish that they were not necessary. But then if they are necessary in this world, I think that the question that we also need to keep asking is, how can a world without them be dreamed of? What would that look like? And how can we strive towards it? I'm sorry I did not have the time to put all of the bibliography where it should have been, but you can check it on the website and I will send the link. And thank you.